G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. See that? That's respiration. See that? That is tail wagging while asleep. See that? That is a pussycat on painkillers mixed into the cat food. Look at that there, see? Thus be the cat food, and here be the prescription animal remedy. Ilium meloxicam, cat. Initial dose 0.1 of a milligram per kilogram of body weight. Volume 0.2 of a mil per kilogram. Maintenance dose 0.05 of a milligram per kilogram of body weight. So 0.1 of a mil per kilogram of body weight. So we have a specialist syringe that says cat, and that's the 4 kilogram mark. And would you believe, Skitty of the kitty variety, he weighs 4.1 kilograms. So he had enough for an 8 kilogram pussies of the catus in his very first dose, and he ate half of it. So he's effectively had 1 day worth of normal pain relief. And because pussycats here in Australia are in exactly the same situation as our citizens in Norte Armed Americano, i.e. they have no Medicare, to visit the vet, we have initial radiographs, we have a convenia injection, which is antibiotics, we have a meloxicam cat oral suspension 30 milligrams, we have a companion animal consultation, and we have rounding. Now, companion animal consultation means having to put up with listening to me, because Warbles on a Lot talks too much. So, initial radiographs, $192.95. Convenia antibiotic injection, $34.54. Meloxicam cat oral suspension, $67.69. Putting up with the silly old bastard talking about the cat, $83.65, rounding 3 cents. So there you go, $378 visit to the Pussycat doctor. And you know what? The poor little bugger has cancer of the mouth. Guess what? I know a bit about that. Because I have Medicare, they were able to treat me. And I had 7 lethal doses of radiation between here, and I had half a lethal dose of chemotherapy. And I had to get rid of all my teeth to make room for the radiation. And the teeth are never coming back, but they tell me the cancer's gone. I think it cost $178 to the taxpayers of Australia every time I went over and waited in the waiting room and talked to the radiation oncologist. Would have cost them the same amount every time I went and talked to the oncology chemotherapist. I don't know what the medication cost, but it was $750 at per each for the anti-nausea drug they gave me while they were giving me the chemotherapy. And while I was in the linear accelerator, the 6.1 megavolt beam of photon equivalent X-rays that went through this face of mine for 2 minutes per day for 35 days to wipe out 7 different tumours with 70 grays. 10 grays, whole body dose is lethal. 70 grays of radiation between nose and here, and that's only 12% of his body. So I only got 87.5% of a lethal dose of radiation. Yeah, I got all that free on Medicare. In fact, when I go from here to Coffs Harbour, they pay me 40 cents a kilometre to drive down there and back, 518 kilometres. Even if I go in my car, my daughter's car, or my son's car, it actually runs at a slight profit compared to the fuel. If I was to go in my mother's old car, a little Honda Jazz, 4 tiny winny little cylinders, it used to use $60 worth of fuel. And they put $200 in my bank account every time I went down there. Guess what? Pussycat catus doesn't run the chemoradiotherapy. Pussycat catus quietly breathing over there, asleep, full of painkiller, no drama. Pussycat catus is not in pain there. As I've said both to the vet here in Australia and my daughter in London, because believe it or not, my mobile phone can make text messages to my daughter in Tokyo and in London, and I'm expecting to be able to send text messages to her when she goes to Dusseldorf and Duisburg and wherever the hell it is my mother-in-law happens to live. So my daughter's in charge of this, right? I'm not empowered to tell the vet to kill the cat. And at this point, here's what I said to the vet, and here's what I said to my daughter. This cat is old, feeble, fragile, geriatric. It has a terminal condition. However, the cat is also eating, drinking, walking, jumping back up onto the bed without assistance. The cat is continent. The cat came home from a trip to the vet in an afternoon in town, and it piddled in the litter tray after eating the painkiller laced cat food, didn't drink any water, didn't drink any milk, and then jumped up onto the bed. And I brushed the cat and patted the cat, and then it lay down and it's sleeping. And half the initial loading dose, which is twice the normal dose, is still there in the cat food for tomorrow morning or during the night or whatever. So I'm going to say that while the cat is purring while sitting on the bed, while the cat is able to move across and talk to me and say good day, if the cat's not looking like it's really pissed off, I am absolutely loath to try and do anything nasty to the cat. And like I said to the vet, I've had a kangaroo that grew up in my clearing, a kangaroo who sat in the couch while I fed its mother bread, grew up eating bread, got to the point where he was too old to live with his mother and his sisters and his aunties, and he went out there on his journeyman years. Normally that's like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depends until all the older male kangaroos have been killed. Then suddenly they hit, their second growth spurt. But on his very first day, he'd been gone, left at about 10 o'clock, 4 hours later, 2 o'clock till 2:30. I heard a high-powered gunshot. And about half an hour later, a king parrot showed up. And the king parrot flew over and perched on the rail of my veranda and looked at me, and it went off, screaming and making a big noise. Now, as I said to the vet who looked at me like I was crackers, I don't speak king parrot. I understand marsupial vocalizations and body language because I've had 30 years of it. But king parrot, I don't speak king parrot. She looked at me like I was a bit weird. Anyway, the king parrot was trying to tell me that Dyson had been shot in the foot and he was really having a hard time getting home because he showed up 2.5, 3 hours after the king parrot. And he was hopping on one foot, and the other foot didn't seem to have any injury, but it was obviously completely unstable. All the ligaments were loose. It was only being held together. His ankle was only being held together by the skin, apparently. I thought he must have maybe had his ankle run over. There was no tire tread or tread marks or nothing I could see. Maybe he'd misjudged the jump running away from the person who made the gunshot, and perhaps he'd broken his ankle. But he hung around the clearing, and within a day I could see the entry wound and there was no exit wound. Somebody shot him with a very small caliber, very high velocity, hollow point hunting round, the sort of gun that was designed for shooting foxes in through the eyeballs, so the bullet would fragment into such small pieces it wouldn't go out through the skin on the back of the head. And that would get you an extra $5 at the skin buyer on a $25 skin. And people were going out and spending $2,500 extra to get a rifle that would do it. So he was shot with a very small caliber, high velocity, high powered, hollow pointed hunting round. Went into the back of his foot at the top of the hop from behind, diagonally, and the shock completely wrecked his whole ankle joint. And the vet's eyebrows are crawling up into her head as I'm saying this. And then I said, well, for the next 9 days, in the morning, he'd hop over to the west side of the clearing and he'd dig a hole in the ash pile where I throw the ashes from the fire. And he'd put his wounded foot into the hole in the ash pile and he'd cover it up. So the serous ooze was going into the charcoal and no flies could get at it. And I was taking him bread and I was taking him water. And about midday, when it got a bit cool there, he'd go to the other side and he'd sit in a different spot where the sun was on him in the afternoon as it got cool. And it took him 10 days before, on his last day, he hopped up at sunrise onto the veranda and he knocked on the door and he had his bread and he looked at me and it was like, thank you, human, for giving me somewhere to hang out before I'm ready to die. And he went back to his daily routine. And it was a Friday, and I went to town in the Friday afternoon, and he was over there on the other side of the clearing. And when I come home, he was still there on the other side of the clearing, and he looked up, at me as I drove in around the roundabout, around the driveway. And the next morning, he was dead. So I know it takes 10 days for a kangaroo with a gunshot wound through the right ankle to die of shock and septicemia, despite having a clean wound, plenty of food, plenty of water. I don't know how long it's going to take a cat with a pathological fracture of the jaw from a neoplasm to decide it doesn't want to stay alive. But if my daughter had given me a baby human, I would not be talking to the vet or the doctor about euthanasia. If she said, I have to go over to the other side of the world to talk to my 93-year-old grandmother before she falls off the perch, here's my 17-year-old one-eyed cat that's got cancer of the face. Can you look after the cat till I come home? I'm going to say, yes, dear, I'll try and keep the cat going. As long as the cat doesn't tell me that he's in so much pain he can't hack it, I am going to support that cat to hang in there and lick my daughter's hand when she comes back here. And I'm expecting her to come back here. Here we are today. Right, here we go. I went to the vet. She left Glenninnis here. She flew out of Sydney here. This is London. She's in London. She's going to get to Germany tomorrow. She's going to spend the next week with her grandmother in Germany. She's going to leave Germany on the anniversary of the day that Hitler invaded the USSR, and she's supposed to get back to Sydney in the morning of the 24th, and then she's supposed to get on a train on the 25th and come back here. So she should be here on the night of the 25th, right? So it's not even like SkittyKitty has to put up with it for 14 days. I've got pain relief for him. I don't know how much pain he's in. I don't know what the vet's going to say when my daughter rings the vet. I don't know how convincing the vet's going to be, because the vet's attitude is, if she had my daughter there today, she would have been talking about euthanasia to my daughter. What can I say? This time last year, I was somewhere pretty close to that. As I recall it, I had a lump the size of a potato hanging out here, and I had 6 other lumps growing. They got me back home from the Mid-North Coast Cancer Institute. I know we're not going to get Skitty out of this, but maybe, perhaps, I can jolly him along and he can cope with life, and he can lick my daughter's hand when she comes home on the 25th, maybe. We'll see what the vet says, we'll see what my daughter says, and we'll see how long Skitty can give me the impression that he's enjoying his life. How long does he keep eating and drinking and walking around and purring? Right? I can put up with him being incontinent if that has to happen. I'm a registered general nurse by training. And do you know how many incontinent people I've looked after? Yeah, I can cope with an incontinent pussycat. You know how many nappies I've changed on babies? Whether I was paid for them or not, I can cope with an incontinent pussycat. Anyway, I can hear a possum who wants to be fed outside. So that's the update on the sick pussycat. $378 to tell me that I'm going to be lucky to keep the poor little bugger alive until my daughter comes home. What was on at the YouTube? Life is such. Yeah, life is such. When Ned Kelly was about to be hung, he said, "Such is life." He said that. It went into posterity. As a little girl reading bushranger stories, my daughter's rephrasing of it was, life is such. Makes as much sense epistemologically. What was on at the YouTube? Life is such. Have a good one. Ciao. Booze helps when life doesn't seem to be making a whole lot of sense.